Alright, so in part 4, we are going to look at quadrant trig. So trigonometry in different quadrants on a Cartesian plane. Now this is a very, very important question from now up until matric. In every exam question paper with trigonometry, you are going to get a question like this. Alright, so here in this blue bubble, I highlighted a very important thing you need to understand. Alright, so when we work on a Cartesian plane, you know that there's an x-axis and there's a y-axis. So instead of talking now of my adjacent side and my opposite side, I'm talking about my x, my y, and my r side. X referring to my x-axis, y referring to my y-axis, and then r referring to my radius, or in your case, you can also see it as it being your hypotenuse, or in Afrikaans jou skynsy. Now, a little rhyme I teach my learners is the following. Alright, shield your rear, cause x-rays tan your exterior. Now, if you study this, you will never have it incorrect. So, shield your rear means that sine is equal to your y value over your r value. Alright, cos x-rays tan your exterior, so cos, the C goes for cos, your x over your r value, x over r. And then tan, your exterior, will obviously be tan, alright, your exterior will be y over x. If you go and study this, you will not forget it again. Alright, moving on to my Cartesian plane. Alright, now this here is still my x-axis and this here is still my y-axis. But because I'm working with degrees, I also need to have degrees on my Cartesian plane. Now the way in which we write your degrees is this point here is always your starting point, so this is the point 0. So it will be 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 and 360. So if I tell you that an angle or theta or x lies in between 90 and 180 degrees, it means it starts from 90, which is a point here, all the way to point 180. Alright, that is what it means. If I tell you that an angle is between 90 and 270, it means it starts at 90 and it continues up until 270. So it can either lie in this quadrant or in this quadrant. If I tell you that an angle lies between 270 and 360, it means it goes from 270, which is here, all the way to 360. Alright, so you need to know based on if I tell you where my angle lies, between which 2 degrees, which quadrants does it represent. Now the next thing you need to know is the cast, which I wrote down here for you. Alright, so what does it mean? Alright, in each quadrant, I have something that is positive and something that is negative. So in my first quadrant, so this quadrant here, I have A, which means that all of my identities are positive. Sine is positive, cos is positive, and tan is positive. Alright, then my second quadrant, I have S, which means that only sine is positive. So if only sine is positive, it means that cos and tan will be negative here. In my third quadrant, I have T, which means that only tan is positive, which means then that sine and cos will be negative. And then my fourth quadrant, my final quadrant, is cos. So this is C, so this is where cos is positive. So if cos is positive here, it means sine and tan is negative. So if I ask you where is sine positive, alright, where will sine have a positive value? Obviously here, because everything, all of them is positive. And in my second quadrant, because it's the S quadrant, it's the sine quadrant. Alright, if I ask you where will sine be negative? So obviously it will be negative where it's not positive. So it will be negative in the t quadrant because this is where tan is positive, and it will be negative in the cos quadrant because this is where cos is positive. Alright, do you see that? You have to understand this concept, otherwise you're really going to struggle. Let's try it with cos as well. Where will cos be positive? So cos will be positive in the all quadrant because everything is positive here, as well as in its own quadrant, which is quadrant number 4, where C is located. Where will cos be negative? Right, so where will cos be negative? Obviously where it's not positive. So in sine's quadrant and in tan's quadrant. Alright, a last thing you need to understand is when I say that something is greater than 0, so for example, sine is greater than 0, it means that sine is positive. So where will sine be greater than 0? It will be greater than 0 where sine is positive. So in my first quadrant where everything is positive, and in my sine quadrant. Alright, if I say the opposite, so sine is less than 0, it means that sine will give me a negative value. So where is sine negative? In my tan, in my third quadrant, and in my fourth quadrant with cos. Alright, this is the theory aspect you need to know, you need to study. Otherwise you're not going to come right with it. Alright, now let's look at how a question will look. So the question will say, if 13 sine theta plus 12 is equal to 0, and tan theta is greater than 0, determine the following with a sketch. If the word sketch stands there, you know this is what you have to do. This is the type of question. Alright. Even if it doesn't say it, you still see that there's a bit of extra information. However, the moment you see that it says with the help of a sketch, you know this is what you have to do. As die vraag sê met behulp van 'n skets, dan weet jy hierdie is die tipe vraag waarmee jy besig is. Alright. So the first thing you do is you take your first part of the sentence. So they say, if 13 sine theta plus 12 is equal to 0. That is my first part of my sentence. Alright, so I'm going to rewrite it. So 13 sine theta plus 12 equal to 0. Now, I want to have a fraction because I need a ratio. So to do that, I have to take everything over that is not my sine theta. So I'm taking over the 12, so it becomes 13 sine theta equals to negative 12. Now, I still have a 13, so I want to take over the 13 as well. It is multiplying on this side, so if I take it over, it will become negative 12 divided by 13. Alright, that's the first thing you do. Now if I quickly redraw my cast diagram, okay, this thing I worked out here has to do with my C, my A, and my S and T. Alright, so what identity am I busy with? I'm busy with sine. And my sine value is negative. So in which two quadrants is sine negative? It is negative in my T. Right, so it will be negative in this quadrant, and it will be negative in my fourth quadrant. Right, that's how you determine the first part. So you have to always make it a fraction, something over something. Then you check what is my identity. My identity was sine. And was my sine positive or was it negative? It was negative, so where on my Cartesian plane is sine negative? Where the tan quadrant is, my third quadrant, and in my cos quadrant, which is my fourth quadrant. Right, now we go on to the second part of information. So now they say, and tan theta is greater than 0. Right, so tan theta being greater than 0 means that tan theta has to be positive. Alright, so now we're going on to the next thing. So where is tan theta positive? So tan is positive in my first quadrant where everything is positive, as well as in my third quadrant where tan is. Do you now see that there's always going to be one quadrant where you have two dots or two spots? Alright, so in this case, it means that this triangle, this sketch I have to draw, will be in my third quadrant. Right, you always draw a sketch. I'm just going to remove this now so that you can see. Alright, your sketch always goes to your x-axis, never to your y-axis. Alright, it always goes back to your x-axis. And there is my 90-degree triangle. Alright, that's the first thing you have to do, is determine your sketch. Alright, now we're going back to my values. So at the moment I have sine theta equals to negative 12 over 13. Now we need to know what is this 12 and 13. Is my x, my y, or my r? Alright, so remember this is your x, this is your y, and this is your r. Alright, on the left hand side of my y-axis, my x will obviously be negative, and at the bottom of my x-axis, my y will be negative. This is important to remember, alright? Because it will have an impact on your answer, and your r is always positive. Alright, so sine, going back to what we said earlier, sine is my y value over my r value. So it means my y value is 12 and my r value is 13. Alright, so let's remove my r because I know what it is. I know that my r value is 13 and I know that my y value is 12. But remember where it lies, it has to be negative 12. Thank goodness I had a negative there, so I know I am correct. So what do I need? I have my y, I have my r, I need my x. So no matter what you need, the next thing you have to do is calculate that third side. And we're always going to do it by making use of Pythagoras theorem. So it's going to be r squared equals to x squared plus y squared. Alright, so my r value is 13. My x value is unknown to me at this point, and my y value is negative 12. Alright, putting this in, I get 169 equals to x squared plus 144. Now I want to get my x squared alone. That means this 144 has to go over. And if it's plusing on this side, what is it going to do if it goes over? It's going to subtract. It's going to minus. This is very important. You guys usually forget that now I have to minus. Alright, and then 169 minus 144 will give me 25. So to get rid of my x squared, I have to put both sides in the square root. So x is equal to positive or negative 5. Alright, I always have two options. Looking back at my sketch, where does my x lie? It lies on the negative half. So I know it will be negative 5. Alright, now having this, I can go and finally answer my question. So they asked to determine sine squared plus cos squared theta. Alright, this angle here is my theta. Alright, so let's just rewrite it here. So sine squared theta plus cos squared theta. I'm not asking you to solve for theta. So you're not taking anything out or shift factoring, none of that. Alright, remember your sine is your, let's quickly go back. Sine is y over r, so it will be y value over r value squared. And cos theta is my x value over my r value, so it's going to be my x value over my r value squared. Alright, now we substitute in, so my y value was negative 12, my r value is 13, and then my x value was negative 5, my r value was 13. Squaring this, I get 144 over 169 plus 25 over 169. And if I add that together, I get 169 over 169, which gives me a final answer of 1. And there you concluded your entire question.